are all aware of the unique problems that we're facing in Pennsylvania schools. As a mother of four and a lifelong resident in the Commonwealth, it's been just a tremendous, tremendous focus for me to make sure that we have the right resources and interventions for our students. What I've learned, especially over the course of the last 6 to 9 months in researching and understanding how we could support all of you in leadership roles across the Commonwealth. I've had discussions with superintendents and representatives on the House and state level, and I'm hearing a few things that are happening across the Commonwealth, and I just want to name them here. Specifically, low engagement, just getting kids engaged during the school day has been very difficult, especially since after the pandemic and a return to school. Apathy and distraction, of course, but also goal setting. And all of these things are contributing, of course, to academic performance. But, anxiety and mental health and emotional well-being has also been greatly impacted. And we're going to lean into some research and studies that have been done, especially over the course of the last couple of years, that point directly to a student population in crisis. So that's why we're here today. I want to name that the school community goes well beyond just the students. So when we're looking at interventions that are going to make impact and be really meaningful for our communities, we need to also make sure that faculty has the right support and resources. And of course, families, caregivers, parents, we need to make sure that they not only understand what resources that our students and faculty are using and exposed to, but also have the same access to, so that they're receiving the same support and resources that our kids are receiving. The present day challenges, have been named. And of course, our partners at Florence and Harvard's Human Flourishing Project have a deep interest in this. So we're going to get into some really important questions in just a moment and let the actual researchers talk. But I want to name that a lot of information is coming out, and I know there's a lot of information being thrown at each of you, probably on a daily basis. But just last month, there was an online meeting, and it was focused specifically on promoting flourishing in schools. And it was from the Flourishing Network. And we have Aisha here with us today representing that body of work. But chronic stress is a main contributor to the problems that I mentioned. And of course, this is multidimensional and complex. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but especially financial instability. A lot of the anxiety from the pandemic is still permeating. And so we have to really look at the contributors of stress, as well as what stress is doing to the system of the people in the communities that we're supporting. What we know is that flourishing really decreases as the academic year increases. So we're going to talk more about that. We also know that these interventions are critical, but that kids also need more time and space to reflect and feel connected to their character and virtues, and they need time to tune into themselves. And so a lot of our methods lean heavily into supporting this type of time. What we've found through our work, not only independently at Studio B, but especially with our partnership with Florence, is we need to first really assess the populations in which we're working. So I'm going to turn this part of the presentation over to Marie Gill, and she's going to talk more about our methodology. Marie?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Really appreciate this time and opportunity to share just a little bit of what we are learning and how we are assessing opportunities going forward. So at the end of the day, there are a lot of opportunities to connect powerful resources, but we do so looking at the science-backed, peer-reviewed research that's coming out of Harvard University, and in particular, Dr. Tyler Vanderweel's Human Flourishing program. The research and insights that the two professionals here on this call are offering is powerful, and we want to harness that and put it to use and being able to help people understand who they are, and in collective, how do we bring flourishing to our communities, and as you mentioned, to all the people that are responsible for helping us all thrive. So next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the things that we're really excited about, and one of the things that I think helps differentiate how we look at this opportunity, is that we start with just listening. There is no way to make any kind of assumptions, because at the end of the day, we individually are all very unique, and we all have different aspects of flourishing. One thing that comes out of the flourishing assessment that we do is that you understand who you are and where you are in that moment of time. But as we all know, our concept of flourishing or well-being can evolve and ebb and flow with a lot of things. And so being able to tune in and understand where you are at a particular moment and where you are at a particular point in time is really helpful. And as an organization, whether it be a school system, teachers group, student population, things are going to be expected to ebb and flow. So being able to quickly assess, being able to quickly get a temperature on how well your people are doing is critical. So with that information, you can now then say, what do we need to do together to figure this out? As I mentioned, we're all unique individuals. We all have different things that will help us individually figure out how to thrive, how to have well-being. So let's co-create and design what that means for your organization, for your community, for your culture. There are so many things that make you who you are, and ultimately who you are as a community or as an organization. So therefore, how do you harness what those unique attributes are and tie that to the flourishing research so that the interventions that are suggested or created together really work for you and really resonate with your community and with the group you're talking to. I hope you're on mute, Jen.
Thank you, Marie. I'm going to
Yes, no
stop
worries.
sharing so we can have a much more intimate discussion and dig on into some really good questions that we've kind of come up with. But feel free to also jump into chat, submit your question. We'll be keeping an eye on those questions as well, and we'll integrate them into this discussion. I'd like to start by asking Aish to really explain, from your body of research, and you're really an expert in this field particularly, what would it look like in a school if all of the teachers and students were properly resourced, happy, and doing well?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really want to say first off that I really appreciate the framing of a school community to comprise of students, teachers, and families. That was really meaningful for me, and it's not often how we tend to think about school communities. So I really want to just first appreciate that approach. And let's just I like to focus on teachers first and then to students. And in terms of teachers, we know that there are common problems that we face in education all around the world, which is the problem of burnout and tiredness, exhaustion among teachers. In most social workers, among most social industries, we see this, but especially in education. And so the approach to flourishing will definitely be able to address those issues, right? This kind of burnout and exhaustion among teachers. And it would imply and also lead to better physical health and more physically health promoting and health preserving behaviors. So we know from research that individuals who are flourishing more, happier, they're more likely to engage in health preserving behaviors. That would imply, from an organizational point of view, less sick days, and that's also another of the benefits. But there would also, we would expect consequences for work engagement. So we would expect teachers to be more engaged and more proactive in their jobs, more likely to innovate, to create, to take initiative, and just a different way of relating to the job. And also relationships at work could improve, and more organizational citizenship behaviors. This is what we call people in a workplace helping one another. And that would be more likely to be experienced. And when we go back to the students flourishing, and what would we see students, how would we know when a student's flourishing? I like the framing of the question. And one thing that's about happiness, although like we tend to measure happiness and flourishing more as a subjective way, so internally and my own assessment of being well or doing well, happiness is also visible in behaviors, in externally observable behaviors. So I really like to think of that when we know that students are flourishing or they are happy, we would be able to see them from the way that they smile, from the way that they sit up, you know, from their physical behaviors. It's actually like real. It's not only just words, it's like something that's we know from research that there are objective indicators of these subjective experiences. And they would be more interested in their environment, so less distracted and more alert and interested in what's going on in their surroundings. And they would also have better relationships, so less antisocial behaviors and more cooperative and caring behaviors could be observed among students. And also we would probably, we now have like strong evidence also linking well-being to more traditional outcomes that we care about, like better grades and test performance and less absent days, those kind of outcomes. So these are, like, I think, in summary of what we know from research.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate your feedback. Marie, we hear this word flourish. We keep hearing the word well-being and flourish, but flourish is new. It's new to the ecosystem. We're just kind of integrating it. I'm wondering if you could define it for this audience and kind of differentiate the meaning of flourishing versus well-being.
Yeah, I will put my layman terms on this, but one of the things that is most fascinating and absolutely inspiring from the work that Dr. Vanderweel and the broad team has brought forward is that the concept is really old. It's the concept of human flourishing goes way, 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 way back, generations and generations. And many philosophers, many practitioners, many experts have always kind of pondered and questioned what would it be like to have full thrivability and flourishing. And one of the things that I think resonates with me is that flourishing, first of all, it's a beautiful word. I find myself pausing every time it comes up in just everyday life or everyday opportunities. I had a friend over and she was bragging about her garden and her garden was flourishing. And I'm like, yes, if you think about how beautiful that could be when humans could be described as a beautiful flower, that is powerful. The concept of flourishing, though, is aspirational. It is something that, if we think about all the stuff that's out there, there's a lot of wellness stuff. There's a lot of, maybe good ideas, but not necessarily proven, maybe some good solutions that are out there that might not be, rooted in science. But flourishing is a collective of those activities and that knowledge and that concept that, when applied and demonstrated through life, it allows you to really live life. It doesn't mean that every single day, every moment is happy and joyous and awesome. It just means that whatever life brings to you, whatever life shows you, you can take it on and you can really incorporate all the feels, right? It's all those emotions, and you can really revel in sadness. You can really revel in the ways of life in general. So anyway, I think flourishing is something that's super powerful. And if you think about it, it is something we should aspire to. And with the research and science that exists around this and is being collected and really honed in, we now, I think, have incredible opportunities to really put it to practice.
Beautiful. And I agree with you. I think the word is beautiful. So, and so we're talking about the research and the science and how important it is to have solutions that are fully backed by peer-reviewed study and research. And so, Kelly, I'd like you to expand on that if you can. I mean, what is the scientific evidence that something like happiness, well-being, flourishing, how does this contribute to these domains of well-being, and specifically physical well-being, I think is important to name here, but also mental and emotional, relational. Could you kind of give us some background on what you consider peer-reviewed scientific intervention versus everything else that's out there?
Yeah, and let me give you the context or the lens from which way I'm viewing it. And that is, as a neuroscientist and clinician who's been involved in the neuroscience of learning and transfer of learning into generalization into real life for the last 35 years, using the peer-reviewed process as being part, as a professor myself, not all research is the same. And to be able to really show efficacy and to be able to really measure active, what we call mechanisms of action, what is triggering changes in both positive and negative ways, really requires understanding the research process and how you design experiments. And so in my world, what rises to the top, and so when I sit on various committees at the World Health Organization, what gets reviewed as, is only peer-reviewed science. And that means that the scientific investigators have had either control conditions or other types of designs in their experiment that help us to better understand that this is really an outcome of an experiment. When they measured the effects of stress, for example, on the heart rate, when they measured the effects of stress on cholesterol and stress hormones and things like that, that is going to be a metric that is definable and measurable and monitored over time. So, so when we talk about well-being and when we talk about flourishing, there are a few research labs who've really, really been careful and cautious about adhering to these scientific standards in designing and defining ways of, for example, flourishing. How do we define flourish? And if we define it in this way, how do we measure it? And then not only how do we measure it, how do we hold ourselves accountable to make sure the way we're measuring it is valid and repeatable and generalized and being emerging in different research labs around the world that can find the same evidence that we do. So the standard is really high. And from that is how we make, guidelines at the World Health Organization for the world. So I come at it from more of a neuroscientist in health, but also understanding that work. So thinking about the community in the schools, the students, but also the faculty, the staff, the teachers, and the caregivers. Work is one of the largest contributors to stress in our lives. And so, as Aisha said about burnout, burnout is defined. Well, let me just back up. Stress is defined by the World Health Organization by its physical presence. It's measurable physical effects, both physically, again, all those monitors, but also psychologically. Burnout, on the other hand, is defined more as a syndrome, in the sense that if a teacher is in your environment, there's a misalignment with what the worker, or say the teacher, in this case, the professional, has to cope with in an environment that doesn't necessarily fit. Our approach used to be that, oh, it's just a weakness. If someone burns out, it's because, the person wasn't tough enough to adapt to this environment. And that's just recently changed by the World Health Organization that says, no, it's a syndrome that results from a change in an environment that is not working for that particular individual. So science should be at the basis of our decisions. And I think we should be using definitions and approaches that are based on peer-reviewed science, because that way there's some standards across that which we compare ourselves to with, but also those are the golden standards and guidelines that we use to help promote health and well-being across the world. So I'll stop.
Oh, very good. No, that was beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. I'd like to shift over to the flourishing assessment, and I'd like to hear from Mark about, from your perspective as not coming from the scientific community, but rather coming from the business community. How do you define, what's unique about the Harvard flourishing assessment, Dr. Vanderweel's body of work? And how do you relate it to other bodies of work or similar metrics that exist today?
Thank you. So, the lens that I come at it from in Florence is the reality. If you start with the end state in mind, which is our mission for all humans to flourish, that's ultimately our mission. So we narrow that down in doing our part. So we start with what we know, which is people at work and people at school and data. Okay. The vast majority of the capacity that's out there in the well-being space and the flourishing space, the companies that provide these interventions and services, they're for profit. And so therefore, one of the limitations for human flourishing, you could say a constraint is dollars, money. And so when you are trying to operationalize well-being so all humans can flourish, you have to be very precise. And so we scoured everywhere. And what we found our path to the human flourishing program with Dr. Vanderweel. And we found that the data is more precise. So I'm not a data scientist. So when you take the survey, many other surveys that are out there that are commercial, that are built into apps, go 0 to 5. We go 0 to 10. And that level of granularity allows us to be very efficient with the point of traction where these interventions can be introduced to the population, whether it's in an organization at work or in school. All right. There's a supply chain to it, and we have to be very efficient with that. The peer-reviewed portion of that is very, very, very powerful, because a lot of people make claims that their assessments are science-based. Well, they use some sort of quantitative approach, but their environments are within their technology, their app, their group. And the Human Flourishing Program is global. It's the most extensive research out there. It's 5 years. The data that's coming out is just absolutely incredible. So when we talk in terms of trying to move the needle on people's happiness at work and schools, we want to start from that foundation. So it's all about the data, and it's all about the scope and reach and how many times this has been applied to every culture, to every demographic, all around the world, multiple countries. It's really, really powerful. And so when you get that normative data and you're presenting it to leadership in an organization, there's a certain confidence that comes with it to know where their faculty's at, to know where their workers are at. And then as it deploys down to kids, I think about all the things that were out there. I was a professional young man. I loved being a boy. And I always gravitated towards organizations that challenged me. So I would leave with this, and that is the domain of character and virtue, all right, is one, I think, for me personally, the secret sauce that's going to help out at the society level. When we can get all humans to kind of take a step back, and especially, the opportunity with children, in character formation is I think how you change things in the future for everything.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. And that's a differentiator with the flourishing assessment, that inclusion of measuring character and virtue. And I'd love for Aisha to expand on that a bit, but also I'm also thinking about, especially in the United States, Aisha, we have so many standardized tests, and we're really always trying to like measure performance and you know, deploying these tests and graduation rates, so on and so forth. If a solution like this was deployed in a school system, how would it align or support the current models of success, taking into account, especially this differentiator of character and virtue being included?
Yes, there are so many points I would like to build upon. So first, I'd like to talk also a little bit about where Mark has left on the flourishing assessments, because so like he said, one of the important kind of benefits of the flourishing scale index that was developed by the Human Flourishing Program by Vandervelde is that it was based on a really solid scientific foundation, is that these are like a synthesis of knowledge of because when we talk about happiness and well-being, everyone is picking up another dimension, right? Like they could be mentioning stress, they could be mentioning feeling good. And what Tyler had in mind in developing this measure was like, how can we create a short measure, something that is useful for practical application. So it's not like people are taking a test for 55 minutes, but a short assessment that can really cover as much as possible the fundamental aspects of flourishing that are valued for everyone. So these are the kind of like 5 different foundations, the components of flourishing that are valued across cultures and desired and considered an important part of a good life. And I really, one of the things that I love about the flourishing assessment is this comprehensiveness and yet practical, and being practical and short in terms of assessment. And in picking those 5 dimensions, of course, there's the happiness and satisfaction, meaning and purpose, physical and mental health, and there's the social relationships. And then there's the character and virtue component that Mark is talking about. This is really a unique way to begin to think about doing well as being well, right? When we talk about happiness and well-being, we're mostly referring to positive feelings, feeling good in a moment. But flourishing is much more than that. It's about having meaningful goals to strive towards. It's about doing good to others. In fact, in some cultures, like I'm from Turkey, and in Turkish culture, when we ask, the same word is being used, like to be happy is to be doing good to others, like it's a way of being well. And so there's a long historical tradition of, if you think about all the philosophers like Aristotle, who thought that the ultimate happiness in life, eudaimonia in life, is to strive towards being a better version of ourselves, to find the good in us and to build and to nourish that goodness in us. And the ability to be that, to really strive towards that character building and towards virtue, is an indicator of a life well lived. And this is a really important part and a very important differentiator for the flourishing assessment. And also, like Mark has said, the kind of research effort and the flourishing assessment is being used by parties from all around the world in different organizations and different research teams. So for that reason, there's like a literature that's emerging around it, right? What that means is that using that will give a chance for comparison. Like we will be able to assess flourishing over time, or flourishing across countries, or differences in flourishing across organizations. I think that's also very valuable from a practical point of view, because to draw from actions and plans from that insight will be easier. And that's one of the other benefits of using an assessment that is that has a scientific literature behind it that's supporting. And I think I also would like to talk a little bit about the flourishing over time, because as Mary has mentioned, the idea of, so flourishing is like growing well at the same time, like a flower is growing well over time. So over time assessments are also very valuable because we could see the trajectory of how, whether or not there are changes over time in a student's character, or a change over time in happiness and well-being. And assumingly, we could probably assume that one of the purposes, ultimate goals of education is actually to contribute to flourishing, but not only in the now, like when students or faculty or even families are in the school, but over the long run, right? Like whatever is being done at the school, all the activities are hopefully contributing to a life well lived in the long run, like when we think about life this way. So for that reason, it's also we know from research again that from the perspective of students, when the social emotional well-being of a student is the most important predictor of how happy or how flourishing they are in their adult life. So if we can really create an environment where in a school where the student is flourishing, they're more likely to flourish over the long run. They are more likely to get jobs and build families that are contributing to their flourishing. Those resources are being built at the young ages. So we're kind of by using the assessment of flourishing, we could be contributing to that long-term agenda as well.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. One of our mantras at Studio B is self-care is community care, right? So when we're caring for the whole person and we learn to inner resource, we could then really apply that inner resourcing outwards to interpersonal well-being and societal well-being. And that's really what you're describing here is that rippling out, that expansion of good in the world.
Exactly. So the holistic side of it is very, very attractive because there's the character and virtue bit, there's the health bit. It's really bringing together all these dimensions within a point in time. And then it could also cover well-being over time for the individual's life, but over time. And then it also has the aspect of this, the communities and the individuals. It's that holistic assessment and holistic possibility of development and growth that is really meaningful, I think, for practical purposes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm thinking as we're talking, I keep thinking about the pandemic, of course, because it's been such a significant, monumental global event, right? Impacting all of us, of course, in different ways. And I'm thinking about the critical nature of interventions right now because of where we are as a society, throughout the world. And I'm thinking about the implications on brain health specifically, and how important it is to provide resources and interventions that, of course, are science-based, so we've gotten that out. But how important is this work right now, Kelly? Can you kind of take that one and feel free to jump in, Aish?
Yeah, I'm going back to the WHO's definition of stress, and it's your body's response to coping to changes in your environment. So that could be, changing anything as minor as changing an hour. Think about when school starts and school stops. With daylight savings times, it could be changes in teachers. But when you talk about a pandemic, there's been no greater change in most of our lifetimes, right? So again, speaking about the community, how this affects us. So in terms of the science, we don't, it will take time to see exactly what Aisha said, is that, if we take care of our children, we put them on a life trajectory, a lifespan, we call it, in terms of health, and how that impacts our how we show up in society impacts the communities around us. So whether it's the economics of your state in terms of healthcare expenses, or doing the repercussions that come from that, doing damage control or trying to redirect and put people on a healthy track later. So to get to your point about science, again, we don't, even though we don't fully understand the impact that this pandemic has had, and we won't until we follow it longitudinally, there are immediate effects that we know that we can't wait for 5 years. There's a lot of science coming out right now that has shown, how it's whether it be in mental health in terms of depressions and suicides, but we also know that we have a number of numbers how it's showing up in terms of the burnout in teachers, and which is no surprise why we see the science behind the resignation generation and all the subsequent nomenclature that's followed that is very real. So I think just there's an urgency now. And as much as children and people are resilient, not everybody copes with stress in the same way, and not everyone is affected by stress in the same way. And so even if that child appears to be happy, or that adult seems to be, or their parents seem to be coping, we don't know fully, and often they don't know what really the toll is on themselves as of yet. And so this is one of the reasons why, speaking with, as Aisha's saying, the opportunity to have tools that are stable, that are psychometrically defined, allow us to look at changes over time and have a good understanding of what exactly is changing, but it also helps put in place interventions that are targeted. As looking at the intersection of work and health, there's a great quote that one of the CEOs is saying, and because I'm also in the executive education, is this is a problem we can't yoga our way out of. And that is not meaning that obviously yoga and mindfulness practice and cognitive exercises are exactly what we need. But we can't just suddenly think that you throw one size fits all and everybody's going to cope in that way. And so there needs to be a measure that looks at multiple aspects, because perhaps for one person, the biggest stress is coming from financial. Another person's stress might come from, interpersonal conflicts, whether it's, children on a playground, or if it's, the caregivers and or misalignment with the teacher and the goals that have been assigned to them. So even though it's complex, you need a little bit of a broad net, but you need something that is also precise enough so that you feel confident in what you're measuring and that you can track it over time.
Yeah. The longitudinal studies are so important, right? So just applying these metrics over and over again, and really refining the solution, I think, over time is essential. And I want to pause on that for a second. Marie, I'd love to hear your voice here, because we've been talking a lot about, how critical it is to provide resources and interventions to the specific populations, whether we're looking at a school community or a hospital community or a work community. What are your thoughts there? Because, I mentioned this global experience of the pandemic, and, we're not all in the same boat, right? Like, there's lots of boats out there, and those boats are being impacted in different ways. We're in the same ocean of the pandemic happening. How would you describe to this audience the critical nature of not deploying it's not a one size fits all solution?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have found success in our work is the recognition that team leaders, whether they be a teacher with a flock of students, or someone embedded in an organization, and they have 5 people that report to them on a daily basis. Borrowing an adage from the airline industry, you've got to put your own oxygen mask on first. And I think one of the things that we recognize is, no matter what the organization is, no matter where it is in the world, it's comprised of people, individual people who walk in the doors of work or sit down on the Zoom call with a whole bunch of things behind them, integrated into them, and affecting them at every moment of the day. So whether it's a pandemic or it's just an unreasonable burden of work to get done, there's a lot of reasons why different tools need to be available, and interventions need to be accessible to who those individuals are in a given moment. I think I also use the idea of you've got a recipe card in front of you, and that ultimately the outcome is flourishing. But my goodness, there's so many different things that you can do to help bring that recipe to life. And what might work really well for me today or me this week is not the thing I need to turn to next week or have available to me in the days to come. And so recognizing that there are lots of interventions available that are rooted in science, that are peer reviewed, and that have credibility of research behind them, have those ready for deployment. And that is exactly how we're approaching it with Florence, is that we bring the accessibility of all these different tools, all these different mechanisms for people to tap into. And again, coming back to the very beginning, is we start with science and data that help inform what is needed in that moment and how to deploy it effectively, recognizing that, what are the barriers that might prevent someone from being able to tap into that resource, and how do you bring it forward for them to be able to use.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to be mindful of time. We are nearing the end of our conversation today. I'd like to ask the panel, what are your final thoughts and any final thoughts to share with the group? Feel free to jump in.
I'll start it, and then I'll definitely back off. But I don't do anything without having a deep connection to my own purpose and my own life goals. And this speaks so deeply to me on so many different levels. And if nothing else, my passion and my commitment to this journey is one of urgency. I want to move fast. I want to be able to help people quickly, effectively, with scale. And I'm very excited that so many smart people are linking arms and leaning into this very, very important cause. Because if there was ever a moment in human history to rally around such an important cause, it's now. And I think with this group and with the conversations that we're having with the community, I think it's truly, truly possible for us to start making tremendous improvements on human flourishing.
Thank you, Marie. Mark?
Here we go. So none of this is going to be easy. Okay. None of this is going to be easy. This is a tough task. When Kelly gave the quote from the CEO that said you can't yoga your way out of this, he came from the perspective that he understood that this is an organization issue and problem, and that the organization should be part of the solution. Okay. And it doesn't matter if the organization's in the school system, whether it's, in, nonprofits, it's the same thing. And that, operationalizing these cognitive exercises, these well-being practices, breathing, all these things are complicated. And, the goal that we have is to create a common language for this and a common understanding, and how we approach to solving flourishing across all of the domains is about having a common methodology, is to kind of make these ways of approaching things more broadly understood. And I am in awe of the folks that I've come across on this journey that are committed to helping all people flourish. And I want to thank you personally, Jen. You're one of my heroes. Truly, your leadership in this space, you're one of the folks that brings us all together, and that's where I drive some of the business, approach is seeing that common language, that the heartbeat of it, and then how this deploys out in the field, and how organizations know they have a problem, but they don't know how to kind of start. Okay, and I'm just super stoked that we've figured this out as a point of traction with the assessment, and it's the way forward, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Kelly, or
I would just say, as much as, sometimes we just have to look for silver linings that emerge from what we've all been through in the last couple of years. So thinking about positive psychology and seeing these silver linings. I think what it has also done and what we've seen is that, a greater respect and awareness for mental health overall. And I think in every community, whether it's school districts or anything, there will always be those people. And as a hardcore scientist who might dismiss well-being or flourishing or some of these maybe softer terms as being kind of soft contributions to our building, and that it's our responsibility to find strength, right? And I think the symbolic nature of the World Health Organization changing the definition of burnout syndrome as being a product more of the responsibility of the environment as much as us really gives credence and emphasizes that all of us have some responsibility here, and that the well-being and flourishing of people is all of our responsibility, and that it's a very real science. And it's how that science, which has been around for a while, is now emerging and making, being the title of our stories. It's helping to destigmatize it, and which is now opening the doors to more people like you, Jen, and others who are really made it their social mission and their commitment to help making people's lives better by providing interventions. And so I just think the timing has changed. If we'd had this conversation 5 years ago, some people would have gotten it. But I think now, as a result of the pandemic, more people get it. So that's what I want to close on.
Yeah, the light of awareness is squarely here. I agreed. Aisha, it's been so nice to have you. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm also kind of reflective right now with everyone's reflections. And I think when I first started doing my PhD, it was a time to use science to understand whether these things are good enough. Like you were trying to prove and test if, what does it mean to be happy? Like, is it even related to all the other things that we care about? Like we were trying to, I think, prove and understand if like the value of these like flourishing, right? And to test it, to document it. And I really feel like at this moment, like we've passed that stage, and there is not much else to show. It's like when someone, even when I was talking at earlier this panel, it's like I could go on and on and on and list all the great things that can be achieved by flourishing. And we just have so much evidence right now. And I'm really excited that, I'm both from a scientific point of view and practical point of view, that we're going into the next stage, which is that we know these are valuable. How can we enable this? And I think the kind of engagement from all parties, like scientists, practitioners, organizational communities, this kind of collaborative, multi-stakeholder approach, and the fact that everyone is rising up to this responsibility is just so fascinating. So I think I'm just very hopeful for I'm always like moved by when there's despair and there's hope at the same time. I know we are not in a great place. We've neglected these topics for a while across all parts of our society, especially in education, but there's also hope because we're kind of rising up to the moment. We see the challenges and we're looking for ways to remedy this going into the future. And that's really great.
Yes. I just want to take a moment and hone in on two words that I feel deeply connected to: responsibility, which you named, and accessibility. Right. And for me, when I think about like, okay, what really gets me up in the morning and pushes me forward into this work, it's making sure that everyone eventually has access to this work. And I think the school community, and I'm so excited to be having this conversation, and I apologize for that alert, because the school community enables accessibility to populations that would never be resourced in this way. So I just want to thank each of you for coming today. I want to thank each of you for your work in the world. I want to thank each of you for your presence. And I just want to thank our audience for showing up today and being curious about the work that we are doing. we would like to invite further conversations with you, and we will be following up with you on how to do that. So with that being said, we will be closing this discussion. I hope you have a beautiful day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.